It is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to our speaker for today, and that is Kathryna Baptiste Assee. Kathryna joined the Angostura family as a corporate secretary on April 1st, 2019, and was appointed the Group General Counsel on March 1st, 2020, in addition to a substantive position. She is an attorney at law with over 20 years experience. Kathryna holds a Bachelor of Laws honors degree from the University of the West Indies and a legal education certificate, the LSE, from the Hugh Wooden Law School in St. Augustine. She also holds an Executive Masters of Business Administration with distinction from the Atta Lockjack Global School of Business in Trinidad and Tobago. Kathryna is a member of the Law Association of Trinidad and Tobago, and of course, here with us too at the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute. So it is with absolute pleasure now that I invite Christina to take the virtual podium and present to us her thoughts on this topic of emotional intelligence in the boardroom. Kathryna.
Thank you so much, Kamala. I know you rechristened me Christina, but I answer to anything with a K. I answer to anything with a K, so that's great. I just want to take this opportunity to formally thank Kamala and the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute for giving me the opportunity to present or to lead the discussion on such an important topic as emotional intelligence in the boardroom. You know, I think it's a topic that's not discussed enough, and Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute must be applauded for raising awareness on this important topic. You know, everyone speaks about intellectual quotient, how bright a person is, but never about emotional quotient and emotional intelligence. And I'll be using the terms interchangeably because, as you know, emotional quotient is just a metric by which emotional intelligence is measured. So I just want to tell you a bit more about myself. I've been in practice, yes, over 20 years, to be exact, 26 years in practice this October. I've been a corporate secretary and general counsel for the past 17 years. I've worked at state companies, private and publicly listed companies. I even had a stint as in my own practice in chambers for about 2 years, where I also provided corporate secretarial services on a consultancy basis. A little bit more about me. Even though I am the consummate lawyer, I've always wanted to be a psychologist and a psychiatrist. And it is really great to see emotional intelligence and, you know, psychology being infused into the profession and into business, because it allows me to merge both my passions, law and psychology. And, you know, using coaching in business, emotional intelligence courses, presentations such as these really give me a chance to explore my passion as well in psychology. So without further ado, let me share my screen. You let me know if you're seeing it well.
Yes.
Yes, great. And so I'll start with going through the agenda for today. I've separated the agenda into two parts. The first will be my presentation on, you know, what is emotional intelligence, etc. And the second part will be the discussion. However, I wanted to say that I'm welcoming all of you to contribute during my presentation. Please feel free, raise your virtual hands, and we can always allow you to speak, because I want this session to be very interactive. It is a discussion. I am by no means the guru on emotional intelligence. I'm just giving you my perspective from a corporate secretary's perspective, a governance professional's perspective. I want to also thank each and every one of you for making the time. I know everyone is super busy, especially at this time of the year, for attending, and I'm sure participating in a very vibrant manner. So I look forward to this interaction. So the first part of the agenda, I'll go through what emotional intelligence really is. the elements of emotional intelligence, 4 domains of emotional intelligence, why emotional intelligence is important, why or whether it's important in the boardroom. It's a discussion, so I'm not making pronouncements, but just putting things out there for discussion. We'll touch a little bit on emotional intelligence and job roles, whether it's important to a corporate secretary. I'll give you my tips or my top 7 tips for corporate secretaries. And then we go into the discussions, more practical. So dealing with an emotional director, managing board conflict, driving board effectiveness, and if we have time, emotional intelligence and corporate systemic collapse, which is a big one, very debatable one as well. So this is a quotation I found from Daniel Goleman, who you may know is the father of emotional intelligence, so to speak. It says, our emotions have a mind of their own, one which can hold views quite independently of our rational mind. I wanted to start with a poll. When you hear the word emotional, does it conjure up a negative or positive reaction, especially in a work setting? Okay, so 85% of you said negative and 15% said positive. And that's how I kind of expected it to go. My own feeling when I first hear that word is, especially in a work setting, is, something negative. Because you always hear, you're being too emotional, women are too emotional, or, boys don't cry, or big girls don't cry. It's always, society somehow seems to tell us, keep those emotions in check, don't express them. It's not good to be emotional, especially at work. My take on this is that, emotions are neither good nor bad. It's neither positive nor negative. They are what they are, and it's how we manage and regulate our emotions that's truly important. Emotions are important because if you didn't feel fear, you wouldn't know that you had to run away from that pit bull that's attacking you. Or, if you didn't feel love and affection for your children, they might starve. So emotions do have a role to play in our well-being, in our survival. It's just how we manage those emotions in a work setting, in the boardroom, that really demarcates how effective we're going to be. Once you have personalities, you're gonna have conflicts, you're gonna have differences of opinion, you're gonna have conflicting emotions. But emotional intelligence is all about managing those emotions in order to create a cohesive and effective workplace. So yeah, let's get right into it. What is emotional intelligence? My take on it is that emotional intelligence is that X factor. A World Economic Forum article on EI stated as follows: emotional intelligence is that something in each of us that is a bit intangible. It affects how we manage behavior, navigate social complexities, and make personal decisions that achieve positive results. It went on to say, when emotional intelligence first appeared to the masses, it served as the missing link in a peculiar finding, which was people with average IQs outperform those with the highest IQs 70% of the time. This anomaly threw a massive wrench into what many people had always assumed was the sole source of success, IQ. Everybody speaks about you have high IQ or you have low IQ. But decades of research now point to emotional intelligence as the critical factor that sets star performers apart from the rest of the pack. The term first appeared in the mid-1960s in a paper by Michael Beldoff. And of course, it was largely popularized in the 1990s by Daniel Goleman. an American psychologist who wrote a best-selling book called Emotional Intelligence: Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. And it became a buzzword after that. According to Goldman, emotional intelligence is the ability to understand and manage your own emotions and those of the people around you. People with a high degree of emotional intelligence know what they're feeling, what their emotions mean, and how these emotions can affect other people. Emotions are contagious. We've all heard that, right? And I think it's really true. And I said, I wonder if this is so, because you get a feeling, you go into a room and someone enters and they're full of energy, and suddenly you feel full of energy. Or they come in and they're really, sad and depressed and complaining. And when you leave the room, you feel like, oh my gosh, a Debbie Downer just kind of ruined your day. So emotions seem to be contagious. I did a little more research and I realized there's scientific evidence to back up this feeling that we have. It's a concept called social brain and mirror neurons. Mirror neurons, the concept is that a brain cell reacts both when a particular action is performed and when it is only observed. The neural basis for empathy may be a system of mirror neurons. So there was this study done in Italy on a monkey, and they tested a part of the monkey's brain, just one cell at a time. And this particular cell controlled or was associated with the movement of his arm, the monkey's arm. So every time the monkey would raise his arm, that particular cell will be activated. And when they did the scan of the brain, they saw this particular cell activated. But then one day they realized that particular cell was activated and the monkey was not moving his arm. And what they observed is that the lab assistant who was there, it was a very hot day, and the lab assistant had a gelato in his hand. And as he moved his hand up and down, the cell in the monkey's brain was activated, even though the monkey was not moving his arm up and down. And he was just looking at what the lab assistant was doing. So that was scientific proof that our brains mimic the actions as well as the emotions of persons in whose company we are most close, right? So there's another study that showed that if you take two people and give them a questionnaire about how they're feeling, and you put them to sit and stare at each other for 2 minutes, just 2 minutes is all that you need, and you ask them to take the questionnaire again, the emotions of the person who is most expressive, you find that the result is the same for both persons. So this whole concept of the social brain is actually true and scientifically proven, showing that we have so much power within us to affect in the boardroom and in the workplace the emotions of others. And I always say we must always use our powers for good, right? And in that context of the boardroom and in the context of the organization, it will be to further the objectives of the company, in a very effective and constructive manner. So Goldman went on to indicate that there are 5 key elements of emotional intelligence. The first is self-awareness. The second is self-regulation. And I'll go into each of these a little more in a second. There's motivation, empathy, and social skills. So self-awareness, Socrates said, to know thyself is the beginning of wisdom. So basically you want to know your own thoughts, your own behaviors, your own tendencies. So take some time in self-reflection, understand what your triggers are, what, pisses you off, what calms you down. Basically, you have to know yourself. Before you could even start to understand others, it's about knowing yourself, right? Self-regulation is about managing yourself and your emotions, your inner resources, your abilities, and your impulses. So you don't just want to fly off the handle, you want to learn how to manage yourself. Again, knowing yourself, knowing your triggers, and coming up with a strategy to ensure that you do not fly off the handle, that you handle situations well, especially in a boardroom setting. You want to be able to always foster constructive discussions, etc., among not just for yourself, but also among your directors. Motivation. This refers to self-motivation or personal drive to grow and achieve, commitment or goals, initiative, readiness to act on opportunities, optimism, and resilience. Then we have empathy. When you listen with empathy to another person, you give that person psychological air. This is what Stephen Covey said. And I think it's just so true. If you walk a mile in a man's shoes, you really understand what he's going through. And good leaders really take the time to understand what their colleagues are going through so that they can, adjust and adapt whatever the message is, whatever the communication is, whatever the end game is. They know how to read the other party, empathize with them, and then, it makes it so much easier to get the desired result. Social skills, it's the ability to manage and influence others' emotions effectively. It's a composite of competence and communication, persuasion, building rapport, conflict management, the whole gamut, change management, teamwork, and leadership. Goldman himself describes them as friendliness with a purpose, meaning that everyone is treated politely and with respect, yet healthy relationships are then also used for personal and organizational benefits. Right? So I think that's very clear. If you have any questions or any comments, please let me know. Kamala, I'm not sure if I will always see a hand raised, so please also help me there. I'm not seeing any hands so far.
Sure, not a problem. No, at the moment, there are no hands.
Everybody's quiet. Yes.
Right. Nor is there any comments in the chat, but we do invite persons, if there's something that you want to give in response, feel free to place it in the chat and we'd bring it to Kathryna's attention. Or as she mentioned earlier, if you'd like to actually agree with something or share a thought, you could raise your hand and I'll let her know.
Sure, thank you. Okay, so moving along, this is another model, building on Daniel Goleman's model, because I said he is the founding father of emotional intelligence and that whole discussion. I saw something come in. Okay.
Yeah, it was just Dwayne saying thank you.
Oh, okay. Yes, 4 domains of emotional intelligence. So this, it's nothing different from what Goleman is saying. It's just a model that helps us understand it a little better. So you have 4 main areas. So you're focusing on the self as well as the social. And then you have recognition as well as regulation. So for the self, you have self-awareness. So you recognize who you are. The emotional self-awareness, accurate self-assessment, and self-confidence. All that is intertwined in self-awareness. Then you have self-management, which is what I was speaking about with respect to not flying off the handle, and taking control of yourself. So it's self-control, transparency, adaptability, achievement drive, and initiative. And with respect to self-regulation as well, I think it is underpinned by a strong value system and integrity, which is a critical attribute for a corporate secretary. We could talk about that later in terms of how emotional intelligence and ethics are aligned. They could be 2 sides of the same coin, in my opinion. And that whole role of emotional intelligence in corporate demise is a very interesting topic that we could discuss later. So on the social end, with respect to recognition, you have social awareness, empathy, as we discussed before, organizational awareness, and then being service-oriented. And then relationship management, where you have, the idea of inspirational leadership, developing others, influencing others, being a change catalyst, conflict management, building bonds, teamwork, and collaboration. So these are the 4 domains of emotional intelligence. So why is emotional intelligence important? The benefits of high emotional intelligence extend beyond our own emotional well-being. Higher EQ is linked to better health, stronger relationships, and higher performance at work. Emotional intelligence helps us navigate complex social situations that require an understanding of multiple people's perspectives and feelings. So this brings me to our second poll. How many of us have emotional intelligence or emotional quotient listed as a required board skill when engaging directors? Right, so 83% do not have it listed as a required board skill, and the rest have it, which is good. I'm surprised and I'm encouraged that 13% actually do, or 17% actually do have this listed as a board skill. And for those of us who don't have it, I would strongly encourage that we try to influence your chairman or your governance committee to consider including it as a board skill if you think that it is necessary, and we can discuss this hopefully later. So why is emotional intelligence important in the boardroom anyway? This is my perspective. Emotional intelligence is one of the most critical and least discussed boardroom skills. Generally in the boardroom, robust EI carries the payoff of a more cohesive board that effectively makes better business decisions. That is the ultimate goal, right? An effective board requires, and this is inspired by Dr. Ron Supram, my previous lecturer at Bartologjac. An effective board requires a culture of respect, trust, candor, and frankness, culture of open dissent, disagreement, regular board evaluations, and constructive relationships between board and management. The relationship between board and management is critical for a company's success. So this just goes to show that emotional intelligence really is required in order to facilitate these requirements of an effective board, because to have constructive relationships, you have to be able to deal with others with a high degree of emotional intelligence. You have to know yourself, you have to regulate your emotions. You know, we really need to do these things in order to facilitate constructive relationships. According to a Korn Ferry Institute study, high emotional intelligence defines the most successful leaders and is at the heart of the best run companies. So, I mean, all of these studies cannot be wrong, right? And just in your own interactions with your boards, with your colleagues, with your staff, I'm sure you are convinced that emotional intelligence is that X factor. It's that bit that separates, good from great, or not so good from good.
Yeah. So there's a question in the chat from Laverne Francis, and I see she has put up her hand, so we could invite her to ask the question.
Sure.
It's in relation to conducting board evaluation. So I'm sure she's looking for how do you get emotional intelligence in there. Laverne, are you unmuted now?
Hi, good day, everyone. Well, I put it in the chat, but I didn't realize you saw it, so that's why I raised my hand. My question is, how do you conduct effective board evaluations? Because you have that listed as one of the requirements. So,
well, so this is a perspective that an effective board requires regular board evaluations, and there are many ways to do it. Most recently, we did one with our board, a questionnaire. We did it through a facilitator. A questionnaire was administered to the board members. It was confidentially then submitted to the facilitator, who collated the results and then presented it back to the board so that they would understand where they were in comparison to what their view of their own performance was. So they tabulated the scores of all board members, and the purpose of it is really for the board to, take a critical look at itself and chart a new way forward. Emotional intelligence, if that is part of your requirements for board members, then your board evaluation assessment or your questionnaire would incorporate questions around that skill. It could be something like, is the chairman emotionally intelligent, or does he lead with emotional intelligence, or do most of the directors lead with emotional intelligence, things of that nature. And of course, we'll come to it later, there are tools for assessing emotional intelligence. So we can also, employ some of those tools or recommend such to our governance committees. And that will help directors, first of all, assess where they are, identify any gaps, and then, you can take it from there in terms of training or however you want to deal with it. I don't know if that answers your question, Laverne.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Okay, so one more poll, I think, I promise. Do you think emotional intelligence trends higher or lower as you go higher up the organizational chain? Very interesting. So 55% thought that it would trend higher the higher up you go in the organization, and 45% said lower. So this is a study done in the US, emotional intelligence and job title. As you can see here, the emotional intelligence peaked at middle management and steadily decreased as you went all the way to CEO. So we have manager, then it's a dramatic drop when you went to director, then executive, like VPs and so, senior executive even lower, and the CEO was the lowest of the lot. And we could discuss this later on as to why and how. I have my own perspective, which I'll just mention here a little bit. I think when you're in the supervisory and middle management roles, you have a lot to prove. You really want to climb that ladder. You really want people to like you. A lot depends on how you perform, and you need to get your team on your side. And yeah, so that could account for higher emotional intelligence scores. But as you go higher up, I mean, you really don't have that much to prove. Directors are usually consummate professionals, for numbers of years. CEOs are on top of the world because, well, I'm a CEO, so maybe they don't have as much to prove. I don't know. It's a topic for discussion, and we can, if you have anything to say about that now, please feel free. I think it's a very interesting chart, and I think it's a very interesting discussion. Yeah. If you don't have anything to say about that right now, we move
So we
on.
do have a hand up. It's
yeah.
Linda.
I'm excited.
Yes. So Linda, you can unmute and let's hear your question or comment.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity. This is a really important topic, and I'm really enjoying the discussion. Thank you so much. Regarding the CEO and the executive VP going lower and lower where emotional intelligence is concerned, I'm thinking it might be because at the end of the day, the supervisors and managers will be working most times directly with the staff to give them appraisals, intermediate appraisals, and also evaluating them consistently. So in order to maintain a good relationship with those staff, they would have to acquire proper emotional intelligence to make these processes smoother. But when it boils down to brass tacks, whether you're going to keep that staff on or not, it's a dirty job, but somebody has to do it. And that would be the final say of the CEO or the executive VPs, where they're not directly linked to the client. So they could just make a decision without even thinking necessarily of the person's emotions. Of course, they acknowledge that you're going to lose, you may need a job, etc. But they have to look more on the lines of how the business will be sustained. And in these circumstances, they would use a lot less emotional intelligence to make these very hard decisions.
And there's also a contribution on the chat from Shivanjali Ramutan, and it's some similar thoughts that Linda has shares. She's asking, could it also be because middle management or the supervisors, they interact more with employees and other members, whereas the higher up you go, the more remote and removed you are. At that point, you now focus more on figures. That's a very interesting perspective on it too.
Very interesting perspective. Thanks, Kamala, for reading out the comments. I see it a little differently. I feel like the higher up you go, the greater the responsibility is on you to be emotionally intelligent. I mean, a CEO deals with an executive team. He deals, he's the voice at the top. He has to set the tone from the top. Yet, why is it we're seeing that CEOs have lower emotional intelligence? He is the man that is required to motivate the entire organization. So I find it's a very interesting study, and I think we need to do what we can in order to increase emotional intelligence as we go higher up. And as corporate secretaries, I think we have that unique opportunity, especially in boardroom, to effect change and to influence. Sorry,
Christina. Kathryna, Lord, forgive me. So I think the response may be more in relation to not what we think. I think the majority of us may very well agree with you that the emotional intelligence should be more the higher up you go, but what persons are experiencing may be very similar to the results of the US study here. And so she was sharing why that may be so.
Right, no, I understand. I understand what she's saying is that CEOs are not in such close contact with staff, so that they don't have that opportunity to interact as much. I think is what she's saying.
Yes.
Whereas the middle managers and supervisors, and then CEOs also have the harder job of firing and delivering bad news. So. But I mean, even if you're delivering bad news, right, you want to do it with emotional intelligence, yeah?
Good.
So to me,
she actually has her hand up, Kathryna. So maybe we'd let her come.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. After that, Shivanjali, when you are through, we'll invite Margaretan, who also has her hand up. All right, so Shivanjali first.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you for Kathryna. I hope I pronounced it properly.
Yes, you did, but I respond to Christina too. Yeah.
Okay, for enlightening us on this topic that it's very close to my heart. I think it's very important, and it's overlooked. You see it in all spheres of the economy right now. I agree with you entirely. That it's important. The higher up you go, you must have a greater degree of emotional intelligence to be able to set the tone for upper management, lower management, and for employees at the bottom level, because you determine the culture of your company in that sense. But yes, Kamala is completely right. The reason I proffered is maybe because higher management is so far removed, they don't have to deal with the employee who has an ailing child, who has cancer. They just focus on the figures and profits, losses, and how they can increase that. And I think emotional intelligence is it's excellent, and it's excellent of corporate secretaries if they assume the role of pushing this more and more in the boards, because we need to inject it. Well, not we, but the corporate secretaries are the most appropriate roles to inject this into the boards and influence directors to focus more on emotional intelligence, which governs our daily lives, really. So
are you a corporate or a director?
Unfortunately, I'm neither.
Okay. I thought you were one. Yeah.
at a firm, but we deal regularly with corporate secretaries and with directors, even this morning. So it's really interesting, and I'm really glad that this is becoming more and more popular now.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Very valuable.
Okay, Margaret Ann.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And I want to agree with what was said before. And this is just my take on it. Emotional intelligence, as we said, should really be part of the CEO's perspective. However, that's not the case. And while we are saying that because of the figures and because of the workload, etc., that they distance themselves, I want to say differently that if you want to have a healthy organization, then the CEO has to see that as his responsibility, not to distance himself from the members of staff, but to find a way to work with the members of staff. So I have been in organizations in different places, and I have experience where a CEO and would make it a point to meet the staff in different formats very creatively. And that organization, people were very responsive to work. They do things, you know, as because they see that they are part of the organization and they respond well. And I have been in situations where the CEO distanced himself, and so did people. They distance themselves from the workload also. And so I think it is not just a choice that you want to say, well, I have this responsibility, but they must see it as a necessity that I need to get engaged, and I need to set the tone to my staff that we all have to be engaged so that the organization will have a healthy environment and not suffer. So that's what I.
Thank you. That is a really good point, Margaret Ann. And I too have seen, you know, a CEO where he made it his business to go down on the floor and meet each and every person, and he knew all factory workers by name, you know, and show that empathy and that, you know, caring for everyone. And you know, it was amazing, the response. So it is possible for CEOs to extend themselves and to act with emotional intelligence. And it really does make a difference between a great CEO and a good CEO. Or, you know, a CEO that's focused on the numbers. Yes, we want you to be focused on the numbers, but as I said, the X factor is leading with emotional intelligence.
Right, and so Trisha, soon too is also agreeing that this topic has generated quite a few comments already, Kathryna. So we have Trisha and her hand is up, so we'd let her make her contribution, after which we would read out the comment from Gail Alex Solomon, who also has a few points. So Trisha.
Thank you, Kamala. This is very insightful. I mean, I'm a CEO. I'm participating in this, and I really want to learn from it. But what I'd have to say, though, is while we are CEOs and we're responsible for driving the numbers, I think engagement is very, very, very important. And engagement doesn't just come from walking the floors. As a CEO, you know, my responsibility has to be that I'm coaching my team members, my leaders, through a certain disposition, because what we're held accountable as CEOs for performance, right? But coaching helps us create opportunity where we can connect emotionally with our team leaders, and then it also helps us manage a conversation in terms of getting performance out of people, which really brings another topic, which is making sure that your team stays as a high performance team. What does it take to create high performance? Because for me, it's how do I get you over your challenge in order to stay focused on a business? And that's where I see it. And it also plays a role in terms of cascading strategy and how much has your leaders got involved in the strategy as well. Because what happens is if you start doing strategy at the top and it doesn't cascade properly down, and you don't take input from the floor all the way up, nobody's going to be as engaged in your strategic objective, in your targets. So I think it's a combination of all, but staying emotional intelligence is really an action, and an action where in everything that we do, we should be involving everyone. And if let's say the layers are 5 layers down, because I report to my group CEO, And my CEO shows a lot of emotional intelligence. He sees me as a woman trying to do something different and gives me that empowerment. So I am now receiving that, and I also create that within my team through different actions. So I just want to put that in a place and say there is an opportunity through coaching, through cascading of strategies, through just overall engagement. I think the key is around that space. And then when people get familiar with you and they understand who you are, it's easy to share information back and forth because trust is built as well. Thank you.
Really heartened to hear that, Trisha. As a CEO yourself, this is really, really encouraging, and I hope that you get the opportunity to influence others as we go along.
So, Kathryna, I just want to read out to what Trisha had placed in the chat because it really summarizes some important points very nicely. She says the CEO should be coaching and guiding towards performance, and coaching support emotional intelligence of the leaders of the entity. And she said that exits should be the last action. Yeah.
Agreed.
And then we have a contribution from Gail Alex Solomon. Gail says, could it also be that these higher order management positions are occupied by people who simply genuinely lack emotional intelligence because it was never learned or taught or seen as an important skill required for ascension? She said, I do not think it's a skill which is even assessed when performance appraisals at this level.
I agree with Gail wholeheartedly. This is one of the reasons. I truly believe that this is one of the reasons. It's not taught. It's not taught in schools. It's not taught in, from kindergarten, secondary school, go all the way up to university. It's not taught, as far as I know, in my experience. Maybe today it's part of curricula, but generally speaking, we're not taught about emotional intelligence. It's not a requirement for engagement. It's not a requirement in your performance appraisal. So yes, people can ascend to these high positions without even having to think about emotional intelligence. Should done a poll as to whoever has thought about emotional intelligence, their own emotional intelligence or the emotional intelligence of others. Right. And I think it would be in the minority because we're not aware of or sensitized to the importance of emotional intelligence in the workplace. However, I think it's changing now. Maybe I'm the eternal optimist, but I think it's changing now. CEOs like Trisha really bring me hope. I've also seen CEOs in my own career who, just naturally lead with emotional intelligence. So who knows, maybe this trend is going to reverse in the near future. I mean, I'll share a little bit about myself. I'll confess that when I became an executive at a very young age of, I think about 33, 34, emotional intelligence was not my strong suit. I felt once I was morally and technically correct, I was justified in saying, what my piece was. That has to do with being a lawyer as well. You just feel like once your position is right, you can say it. I mean, I wasn't disrespectful, but I was not addressing my mind to, delivery, empathy, knowing my own triggers, knowing the other person's triggers, delivering in such a way that it would land softly and still have the same impact. Those things were not playing in my mind, and nobody ever taught me these things. And I learned gradually, and I'm still learning. It's a work in progress. I've sought coaching, executive coaching and so on. And, that was I must give kudos to my coach. That was one of the first things he said to me, you have to lead with emotional intelligence. You have to identify your emotions and regulate your emotions. It's not just about doing the right thing and getting the results. So I think the trend is changing, and maybe in Trinidad we should do a poll. Maybe it's already changed. Who knows? Okay, so thank you for that vibrant discussion. That was great. So moving along now, is there another comment?
Yeah, so Linda was just agreeing with you. She says the general mood. hierarchy creates a domino reaction throughout the organization. However, even though human relations is a course taught in some present management courses, we oftentimes conveniently forget what was taught because it is sometimes easier to avoid the investment of time and psychological assessment of self and staff.
Agreed. I love these comments. Okay, so if you move along, I have a question. Is emotional intelligence important for the corporate secretary? I guess it's a rhetorical question, right? But let's take it through its logical arguments. The role of the corporate secretary is evolving. I used to call myself a minute maid, jokingly, but we're no longer a minute maid, right? As we all know. The corporate secretary is a governance professional. Those of us who frequent CCGI know of Alison Dillon, and I am always afraid to call her last name. Kamala, help me out.
Yes, it's Alison Dillon Chibiligi.
I will not even try, right? Alison. So recently she did a company's secretary's masterclass on emotional intelligence, and I attended. So the slide is taken from that presentation, and it's about the corporate secretary as a governance professional. And so much more than just an admin person who takes minutes. The corporate secretary is morphing into someone who acts through and on behalf of the chairman and on behalf of the board. The corporate secretary is the eyes and ears of the board, the chairman's trusted and impartial advisor, a confidential sounding board to the board and management, that bridge between the board and management, the primary point of contact for non-executive directors. The corporate secretary ensures effective decision-making even. He or she is the conscience of the company, a relationship builder, aligning interests, a font of knowledge, a role that encompasses all areas of the company's activities, and he or she is the governance champion in the organization. And I'm sure most of you will agree with me, this is the way that corporate secretary is trending. Sorry, that role is trending. And just by the very nature of what we are required to do and what you're called upon to do, you would see that emotional intelligence is very, very critical in our roles. Being, that trusted and impartial advisor to the chairman, you hold so much influence that you must exercise emotional intelligence. And I think somebody's unmuted. Yeah. You must use emotional intelligence and use your powers for good. And good meaning facilitating the company's objectives. Which of these other roles lend to the requirement for emotional intelligence? Relationship build, aligning interests, ensuring effective decision-making. I mean, you're sitting in a boardroom, you can facilitate effective communication towards a decision that is in the best interest of the company. That is the power that you hold as corporate secretaries. And leading with emotional intelligence in the boardroom is key in achieving that mission. So these are just my 7 top tips for corporate secretaries. But before I go on, I think there's
yes, there is a question in the chat from
please
Leanne.
elaborate a bit more on the corporate secretary's role in ensuring effective decision making. Okay, so ensures effective decision making. Okay, so you sit in the boardroom, and you'll please feel free to chime in at any point here. You sit in the boardroom, and let's say directors are going off course, or they are engaging in a discussion that does not relate to an important decision that needs to be made. The corporate secretary may intervene, of course, with respect, via the chairman to say, Chairman, I think we need to focus on this particular topic. You can, use your emotional intelligence to know when to intervene. Do you wait until everyone gives their opinion? You don't want to engage in time wasting as well. So you might say, okay, I'm going to give 5 minutes for people to just to air their views, and then I'm going to engage the chair to say, listen, we really need to circle back to the main issue at hand. Let us make a decision. Or it may be that they're taking into consideration things that are not relevant, or you can even take it to the level of management where in preparing your board pack, you ensure that the elements, you have to protect your board, right? So at the end of the day, the board has a fiduciary duty, and you have to facilitate them and protect them and to ensure that they exercise their fiduciary duty. And part of that is having all the information that is required of them. So in putting together the board pack, you can influence management to ensure that the reports contain all the required information. You can, the corporate secretary is a partner to the CEO as well. So working together with the CEO, you ensure, in my organization, the corporate secretary has a lot of influence. So I can very well say to the CEO, I don't think this paper or this report contains all the relevant information that would help the board make an effective decision. And we have a very good working relationship. We will go back to the particular executive. We will say, okay, no, it needs to contain X, Y, Z, A, B, C. When it gets to the boardroom now, you ensure that your board hones in on the relevant parts of the report that would help them make that decision. And then also you minute the strategic discussion that was had in a particular way to ensure that everything is recorded properly. So it goes from influencing management to the content of the board pack, to the deliberations in the boardroom, to the minutes that you eventually record. I don't know if that makes sense to you, if you have anything to add to that, or if anyone else, because I know there are a lot of corporate secretaries here, if you want to probably share on that point.
I know, so you can possibly move on.
Okay.
Kathryna, yeah, because I know it's a lot that you have to do, but I also do want persons to place a comment in the chat if they want to speak or raise their hand, so we could manage the room and not only have someone on mute. Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks.
All right, so back to my 7 key tips for corporate secretaries. The end game is to remain positive, calm, and constructive, right? Know yourself. As I said before, use your, no, I didn't say this before, but I said you need to know yourself. Self-awareness, as Daniel Goldman said, is one of the main tenets of emotional intelligence. But in order to know yourself, you can use 360 feedback, which means, you engage either in a formal way or informal. You get feedback from, let's say, your superior, from your subordinate staff, from your peer colleagues, from the board, right? You can also seek informal feedback from your friends and family. How, what would you say about me? What do you think about me? Or how did I manage this situation? So you get different feedback from people, as well as your own self-reflection, of course, Secondly, regulate and manage your emotions. As I said before, self-regulation is key. You want to be able to maintain control. You want to fly off the handle. That involves identification of your emotions, reflection, journaling. It could be any of these things, different things work for different people. But managing stress is important in that whole scenario. Because when you're stressed out, you're on edge and so on. So you have to know how to balance everything. Managing the transition from reaction to response. Yeah. Thirdly, hone your listening skills. As you know, there are courses on listening, how to be an effective listener. So I would encourage that as well. Don't interrupt people when they're speaking. Make sure you understand, you reflect back to them to ensure that what you heard was correct, things like that. Show empathy. We spoke about that at length as well. Walking in the other person's shoes and understanding where they're coming from so that your feedback could add value. know your board. You really want to understand the personalities on your board. I'll get into that a little more shortly. Continue to educate yourself about emotional intelligence. As I said, it's a work in progress for me, and we all can learn as we go along, and we should educate ourselves. I don't know, any trends, any new insights, new studies, anything to deepen our understanding of emotional intelligence would add value. And lastly, and this is just, it's not an exhaustive list, it's just my top 7 points: educate or sensitize your directors about emotional intelligence if this is not on the agenda or in their awareness, right? So when I say, you know, self-reflect and identify, it starts with you identifying your own emotions. I told you I did engage as a coach at one point in my career, and he introduced me to this emotion, this wheel of emotions. I actually have it up in my office, printed out, and my staff would come in and laugh and say, let's look at the wheel today. Where are we on the spectrum? And they joke about it, but it is very important for us to identify what we're feeling. And, you know, sometimes it's amazing when you look at all the different, because we probably feel, okay, I'm feeling happy, I'm feeling sad or whatever, but there's so many shades of emotion. And this just helps us to identify exactly what emotion we are feeling. And I found it to be very, very helpful, not just to me, but to my staff. And just even it's a talking point, and it brings awareness to emotional intelligence. Right. Now, this here, when I said, you know, you can educate and sensitize your directors, you can also do this at the management level. You can probably, you know, advise your HR executive to incorporate something like this. Now, I hold no brief for this particular questionnaire. I'm just giving you an idea of what an emotional intelligence questionnaire looks like and what it entails and what it can result in. So this is the Trait Emotional Intelligence Questionnaire. It's used by many high-performance organizations for a number of purposes, including development, coaching, training for directors and senior executives. A colleague of mine actually uses this in their organization in Trinidad and Tobago, and this has proven to be very effective for them. So the questionnaire comprises of 4 broad categories known as factors. So well-being, self-control, emotionality, and sociability. And each factor has several components known as facets, and you can see them in the table here, right? So happiness, optimism, self-esteem, under well-being. Under self-control, you have emotional regulation, impulse control, stress management, emotionality, empathy, emotion perception, emotion expression, relationships, and then sociability, emotional management, assertiveness, and social awareness. And then you have 2 independent facets, adaptability and self-motivation. This is a sample summary result of an actual person who did the questionnaire, and you see this person was highly emotionally intelligent. They scored 92%, but you see it really breaks out. So there are questions in each of the facets, and it then spits out your result, and it looks something like this. And then, so where there are gaps, you can now look into those and get training, or, you know, either on the job or formal training to help you bridge those gaps. Right. So as I was saying to you, you know, you need to know your board. You need to know, as a corporate secretary, know your directors. You know, you don't just sit in the boardroom and hope for the best. It really takes a lot of work. It really takes going in there, you know, studying. You have to study each person, and you have to know who your directors are. You need to know the history of your board as well. And I must admit, I borrowed this from Allison's company secretary's masterclass, because I thought it was a brilliant slide. So you have to know the history of your board. Is it a family-owned board? Where did this board evolve from? The longevity of the board itself, as well as the directors. External forces influencing the board, critical. because, you know, things are not always as they seem. There may be other players, there may be political influences, there may be financial lenders who have board members on the board, and, you know, those factors also influence how the board will operate, because they're on guard, because, you know, let's say a lender has a representative there. If, you know, let's say the company was in trouble or something. Voluntary versus mandatory participation, which feeds into what I just said about having like a lender install a board member, a mandatory board member on your board. You can imagine there may be a little conflict, a little tension there. And then, as I alluded to in the beginning, the personality is on the board. Yeah. This, those of you who frequent CCGI know that this is a very widely used chart, and it's very powerful, which is why it's widely used. Yeah. It's the experiential cycle. So you have an experience, this is the cycle of the experience. You reflect upon it, you use the theory, the facts and data, and then you take action. And in between the phases of the experiential cycle, you have different personality types functioning, and no one really fits tightly in each box. You know, you would have, you know, shades of each, but when you test, you would probably land in one of these 4 areas, either observers, analytics, planners, or dynamics. And just to go through quickly, so observers are people-oriented, driven by values, family, you know, family atmosphere, exits power through relationships. The chairman and the CEO often creative and people-oriented, right? Then you have analytics. They are driven by rules and policies. A lot of lawyers are analytics. They appreciate systems. They exert power through rules. We might have a chairman and a CEO, often analytical and precise in nature, right? Then you have planners. They are concerned with, so analytics are concerned with policy. Planners are concerned with performance, driven by best practices, implementation plans. They exert power through measurement of performance. They want to see how things are done, and they always, you know, they're interested in action plans. Then you have dynamics. They are driven by vision. They feed on innovation and change, and they have that drive. They exert power through passion. And those chairmen or CEO are often intuitive. So the point I'm trying to make is that you need to know where directors fall in this cycle. And that would help you to determine how you navigate with respect to communication, with respect to decision making, with respect to you know, leveraging your influential power in the boardroom. You can't do it unless you really know who your directors are. So, is there a light at the end of the tunnel with respect to EQ? Unlike IQ, intellectual quotient, which is fixed within narrow parameters at birth, you know, they say you're born, you know, more or less with the IQ that you're born with. Emotional intelligence, however, can be learned and developed or enhanced. How can we do this? Through training in listening skills, you know, understanding micro-expressions. You know, there are entire training modules on emotional intelligence. So that is one definite way. But more importantly, practice. You need to practice until it becomes second nature. As I said, it was not my strong suit, especially as a young executive. However, through practice, it becomes second nature. You just know that you cannot react. You know you have to reflect. You have to look at the situation. You have to understand the person in front of you. You have to understand your board. You have to, so much thought has to go into how you strategize. Of course, you have to do it sometimes in a very quick way. But the more you practice it, I promise you, the better you become at it, and the more second nature it will feel. So my take on this is that we need to improve the culture of emotional literacy, starting with parenting and in schools. You know, how many of us allow our children to explain what they're feeling? Do we say, do not cry? I said, do not cry. Or do we say, tell me what it is you're feeling and why you're feeling this feel. Let's discuss your emotions. I am guilty of that. Do not cry. Stop it. But I'm working on it. And I think we really need to start in the home and in schools by introducing emotional literacy, and it will eventually just become part of who we are. So I have a lot of hope for the future. I have a hope for an evolved and emotionally intelligent world. If we do these small things, it can effect very big change. Okay, so this brings me to the end of my formal part of my presentation. However, I would like to now, these are my references, discuss. So for discussion, I wanted to ask, how do we deal with an emotional director? I know many of you, if you're not corporate secretaries, maybe directors, may have come into contact with directors. How do we deal with emotional directors? And I'm sorry that I refer to CCGI so much, but I've done many courses at CCGI. Thank you, Kamala. And in a particular course, we spoke about types of problem directors. Not saying that emotional directors are problem directors, but if a director is not in control of their emotions, it may cause issues in the boardroom. And how do we deal with such a director? What facets of emotional intelligence would you employ in order to deal with such a director? And in one of the corporate governance week sessions, we spoke about the pit bull director. This is the overly aggressive and combative director. You know, he's going to pound on that table, he's going to shout, he's going to try to get his point, he's going to bulldoze over other people's views and just kind of try to get his emotions out. How do we deal with such a director? Kamala, could we open up for discussion?
Sure. So I actually started the responses by saying you deal with them with difficulty. It's great difficulty.
They make life interesting, right? They make life interesting.
Yes. Yeah, just as you said, you know, your emotions are contagious, and so sometimes a difficult director causes other directors to behave a little bit, making it even more difficult to manage the boardroom. But I would be happy to get contributions from persons. Oh, okay, Brahma has given us he says he deal with them in writing. Brahma, you want to elaborate a little bit first, if you want to unmute and tell us how exactly? Do you write to them or do you write to the chair? Go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. It depends on the circumstances. I might write to the chairman. I might write to the board. Things might be reflected in the minutes. But the point is, if I get an instruction, it should be in writing. If I have an issue with that instruction, my response would be in writing. There would be reference to the rules and procedures. I'm a stickler for rules and procedures. And if there's a discussion in our boardroom, it would be reflected in the minutes, as I'll put it as politically correct as I could do it. Yeah, that's how I will deal with it. Because when you have discussions, particularly with the pitbull types, I found that discussing matters with them tends to be difficult. They tend to drown out any opposing conversation.
Yes. Very good. Thank you, Brahma.
Any other comments? So this is my take on it. I just kind of jotted down a few. This is not part of my presentation. These are just my contributions to the discussion. And what I would do is analyze the director's style. I mean, is it that he's just generally emotional, or is it that, you know, a particular issue threw him off? So you have to know your director, right? Having analyzed the director, you try to understand the root of the problem. So the root of the problem could be that this is a director that is out of control all the time. Or it could be that it's a director who has a particular issue and is not dealing with it well. As a CorpSec, I would practice self-regulation, not react emotionally, because emotion with emotion, it's not constructive. Remember, the end game is to remain calm and constructive. So in discussing with the director, or even in influencing the chair as to how to deal with the director if it's in the boardroom, because there are different ways. In the boardroom as well as outside the boardroom, you can also use influence, emotional intelligence. So you
Camille
may
has her hand up, Kathryna.
sorry.
Yeah, Camille Kamabachdore. So we will invite her to share her
Sure.
thoughts. But just before, I wanted to share that Laverne Francis advised in the chat that she said she would approach the emotional director firmly, but with positivity.
Mhm.
I admire that. I would find it so challenging to be positive sometimes in the face of it. But let's hear what Camille has to share.
Hi,
Sure.
so good afternoon, Kathryna,
Hi, Camille.
and members on the conversation this evening. I would first speak to you from two hats. And my primary hat, I am not a corporate secretary, but I am in the role of an audit executive, all right? And I do sit into the boardroom, and I would say where there are, my approach would be where there are, I don't want to say difficult, but probably directors who may have their own biasness and otherwise have a different perspective. At this point in time, really I stick with the facts. I listen, which is very important. I listen and stick with the facts. And my next question would be, okay, so how would you like us to move forward with whatever the circumstances? Because, my approach would be to allow you to say what you have to say, more and I'm dealing more in a professional, respected manner. But overall, I would afford that director the opportunity to be heard, because the long and short of it all, even though I hold the rule that I wear, the tone of the organization is really set by the directors. Right? So it's important to listen, but it's not that I'm saying that I will just roll over and play that and you walk all over me. Certainly I will not do that. But I do have a role as an audit executive to express my opinion on certain things. Now, the second hat that I've worn in the past was a director of an entity. And what I've seen where there would have been or may have been a director who has a different perspective, I have seen where the chairman takes charge of the conversation at the meeting so that it is not an aggressive meeting, and it basically allows for the meeting to continue to be, an outcome of positivity rather than one of being combative. So I just thought I'd share those two perspectives with everyone this afternoon.
Yes, thank you very much, Camille. I agree with you completely. Brahma says, I forgot to mention that when things are put in writing, the emotions usually simmer down. It forces reflection and caution in behavior and words. True. Treat with them firmly and positively. Sorry, this is Karen Corbin. treat with them firmly and positively and try to avoid aggression. I agree with you there, Karen. And I agree with Camille, let them vent, let them speak, but don't counter it with aggression, because that is just going to allow the situation to become more volatile. Let that director vent, as we say. After he has vented or she has vented, you do your own reflection. So you know the director, you understand the problem, you do not react. And then you bring it back to true north. True north is always facts, figures, and best practices, right? So your strategic plan, your the best interests of the shareholders, the employees, and the company, as per the Companies Act or whichever jurisdiction you're in, what the fiduciary duty of directors relates to. Facts, figures, best practices in governance. What are the best facts? So in other words, objective. You want to be objective and you want to stick with facts. You don't want to go into that realm of, well, I feel like this and that and the other. Let's just keep it. So, but you're doing that, not how I used to do it before, as a young executive. You're doing that with emotional intelligence. You're packaging that nicely, respectfully, sweetly, gently bringing everyone back to what is important, right? Linda says, thought it might just take some time out. Sorry, I would also.
Yeah, although it may take some time out of the agenda, she would also follow Camille's approach. Yeah, good advice. And then we have another comment here from Azam Latif, and Azam is joining us from Guyana. He said, on an individual level, we can improve EI by establishing core values that guides our actions. At the corporate level, it will be how we can actualize our core business values, whatever they may be. Good contribution, Azam. Thank you.
That's a very interesting issue about EI and values. Yeah. All right. So that is, thank you for your contribution. And this is also my contribution with respect to an emotional director. Moving along, if no other comments, we can move along to discussion 2, which is managing board conflicts. So you don't just have an emotional director, you have many directors in conflict with each other. How do we deal with such a scenario in the boardroom and even outside of the boardroom? Your directors are just not getting along, they're not on the same page. It may be with respect to a decision, or it may be with respect to how the CEO is managing, or it may be with respect to a strategic issue. But there is conflict, tensions are running high. How would we use emotional intelligence in such a scenario? Do you have any volunteers to start off this discussion? If not, I will just share what I have come up with through my lens. Again, you try to understand the cause of the conflict. Remember, I said you need to have your own, understand your directors, get to know your directors. So you leverage those relationships with each director, using your powers for good always. You can perhaps speak to each director off record with the aim of being constructive for the greater good, which is quelling that conflict, sticking to what is important. As I said, true north, board-approved strategic plan, governance best practices, facts and figures. What is it we're trying to achieve here? Let's all go back to the reason for being. What is our fiduciary duty? What do we need to do to be an effective board and to fulfill our mission here, right? And a corpsec or a fellow director can always be that voice of reason. It may not be heard in the middle of a conflict in the boardroom, but you have time outside of the boardroom to leverage your influence and effect change. you may engage with the chairman to set ground rules and boundaries. If things are getting out of hand in the boardroom, the corporate secretary can assist the chair and say, listen, I think let's just set some boundaries, you know. If you don't want to say it, you could probably send a message, WhatsApp, a Teams message, so that he confidentially can read it, you know, because sometimes the chairman, poor guy or girl, you know, he's caught off guard if things just go awry in the boardroom. And, you know, the corp sec is always there, as I said, confidant, advisor to the chair and to the directors. So you get involved, you very discreetly help them out to probably set, look, guys, let's just take a break here. Let's set some ground rules, okay? These are the boundaries. These are what we're going to do. This is how we're going to act, yeah? Now, if your chairman is a problem, you have to know when you need to go to the right sources. So you may go to the governance committee, or you may partner with your CEO to approach the chairman, or you may seek external help if you feel like the whole board is just too much in conflict or just not getting along and no one wants to respond to what you're saying. Maybe external help might be necessary, right?
And did Camille lower her hand? I had Camille's hand up a little while ago on the same slide. Camille, did you want to add anything else?
I was going to raise the question, but I realized Kathryna spoke about it, but I'm referring to the what if scenario. The chairman is the one that is disregarding the ground rules. The board governance committee isn't able to treat with the chairman's concern. I heard you say seek external help.
Yes.
Yes. I'm wondering how well that works.
Because
if you have a dominant and an autocratic leader as a chairman, you know, it's interesting how that would span out with external help. I'm just thinking aloud here. So I'm just wondering if anybody else.
Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, I think when faced with this situation, I find sometimes former directors, because you want someone who can maintain the confidentiality of the organization and someone who is familiar with the culture, your purpose as well. So for me, I would recommend persons who are like former directors or who have been very involved and who you trust to be able to keep the information confidential and be able to give you good guidance. But I see there's some so there's some other comments in the chat. So very quickly, I'll read them, Kathryna, and then you would respond. So the first one, Karen Coben asked, so if the chairman is the problem and there's no governance committee, so well, we just covered who some of the external persons can be. Trisha Prasad is saying, I do agree. Try to engage directors on an individual basis on the root of their conflict and redirecting them to the strategic objectives of the board or company, because a board must operate as one body, right? Makes sense. Linda is sharing rediscussion too. EI would have to be strategic, planning a debriefing session during a retreat or separately, right? At an organized debriefing, each director will get the opportunity to categorically explore their frustrations. Okay, very interesting choice of word to use there. The board will then agree to document common goals and values by cohesively setting ground rules, and a plan of action should be a similar situation resurface. And then Brahma adds, in his experience, external help doesn't work because there's no obligation to listen to them. Unless you're in the public sector and the external help is the minister, but then there are political issues there. That is true. I think navigating the public sector space can be even more challenging, especially if you're thinking of the external assistance, simply because you your previous directors may actually not be from the same political party, in which case you don't now want to create a whole different type of problem. So it does require the corporate secretary to bring some serious emotional intelligence skill all of their own in this respect.
Right. Agreed. I'm
Oh,
looking
and
at,
Dane just added, yes, sorry, Kathryna.
No,
Dane
no.
added, you can call a caucus and have a one-on-one with the director.
yes. So very, very interesting discussion. Linda. So strategic planning and debriefing, that's a good, or retreat, or separately, right? So these are methods that the CorpSec can recommend to the board. And again, stick to objective facts, right? These are corporate governance best practices. Which board doesn't want to adhere to best practices? Yeah, hopefully. So you arm yourself with that knowledge and you kind of, influence your chairman, your governance committee, the board to agree, because everybody has to agree to do a strategic planning session or do a board retreat or whatever it is, where you can very skillfully raise the issues and help the directors who are in conflict, right? She said if the directors then get an opportunity to cathartically explore their frustrations. And at the end of the day, you come to some common goals and action plans as to how we're going to move forward, But sometimes removing yourself from the day-to-day boardroom can help. It can assist in, quelling emotions, change of scenery, change of energy. A facilitator who understands board dynamics, who is emotionally intelligent himself or herself, even if the corporate secretary is allowed to facilitate using emotional intelligence, then to ensure that all directors get an equal opportunity to vent and set the ground rules at the start, and everyone must buy into the ground rules, right? So the ground rules may be, okay, each director is allowed 15 minutes to speak about the issue, and at the end of the day, we are going to, minute or not minute. Sometimes when you write these things down, it stymies people's willingness to be open. So you can just say, look, everything that is not going to be minuted, it's going to stay right here, confidentiality, express yourself freely. At the end of the day, we're going to write down some action plans and chart the way forward as to how we're going to manage as a board. And the corporate secretary can use his or her influence then to just bring the group together, by reminding people of why they're there in the first place, and what the end game is. So I do understand that there are complexities with respect to politics, with respect to different agendas, everybody not being on the same page. But there's only so much you can do as a CorpSec to effect cohesion and manage board conflict. And these are some really good tips. So thank you for all of your contributions. Let me see, there's some more.
Yeah, there's David Clark has his hand up because he wanted to share a comment. So
I think we have 15 minutes. So yeah.
Yes. We do have a bit of time. Yes, David, you want to unmute and let us know now?
Yes, please. My question is how to manage board conflict.
Okay, so that's what we've been discussing. What area in particular did you want to ask about? So we were saying that you must, in the chat as well, participants have been giving their take on how to manage board conflict. One said, writing to the directors. One said having a retreat, being strategic in the way you approach the directors, giving each director a chance to vent. I have up on the slide as well, always reference your facts and figures and best practices. So board approved strategic plans as well as corporate governance best practices to keep everybody you know, to keep the vision. What is the end game? Let's just, you know, let's not get caught up in all of the other things, but let's stick to the true north. We said that if the chairman is the problem, let us then go to the governance committee. If you don't have a governance committee, you can partner with the CEO. If that doesn't work, you can seek external help. Yeah. David, does that answer your question?
I think it may have, and then we have Denise Clark adding that have found that when you remind the director to remove personality from the situation, the issue is resolved amicably. So sometimes it just helps to give them a little reminder in truth. Thank you, Denise. And yes, David says that your summary did help.
Okay, great. All right, okay, so I have one last area for discussion. This is, sorry, no, I have two more, but let's see. Driving board effectiveness. This one, I think we've been talking about board effectiveness generally. So I will just share what my answers were, or my contribution was. Again, recounting what Dr. Supram had advised. An effective board requires a culture of respect, trust, candor, frankness, culture of open dissent and disagreement, regular board evaluations, constructive relationships between board and management. So the relationship between board and management is critical for companies' success, and emotional intelligence is a critical board skill in driving board effectiveness. So I don't know if anyone wants to weigh in on this topic, but I think we've been discussing this throughout because it is the end game of using emotional intelligence as a corporate secretary, right? At the end of the day, what you really want is an effective board, and to use your emotional intelligence and to foster emotional intelligence in directors so that they will be effective in the boardroom and beyond. Any comments or questions on this topic?
So I think both persons are in agreement, you know, that this exactly is the end game, what you would want. And I guess keeping this focus helps all of us to manage when it is that you do have things that's likely to derail that.
Correct. So I'll just move on in the interest of time to the last topic for discussion, which is emotional intelligence and corporate systemic collapse. And this is a topic that really intrigued me. And I still don't know if I've wrapped my mind around it completely, but I thought it was really an interesting point for discussion. You know, I studied a little bit the Enron case, and there was an article called Reasons of Systemic Collapse in Enron. And this quote caught my attention. It is plausible to think that immoral behavior at Enron stemmed not so much from Lay's, now Lay is the MD, Ken Lay, so not so much from his immoral character, but from his Christian values. Neglecting opportunities to change his value structure, Lay avoided tough decisions that marked loss for others. Consequently, unable to make decisions objectively based on systemic rather than individual motives, he lost his opportunity in creating coherent corporate values, promoting moral integrity. If the suggested causality is true, it underlines the importance of conscious moral leadership as an everyday discipline. So I was a bit fascinated by this explanation or attempt at an explanation for the behavior of the top man in Enron. And they were saying, look, it's not just his immoral character. It's not that he is immoral in nature, but you remember I said you have to understand your directors. So they were saying, based on his strong Christian values, that is what, you know, kind of formed the basis upon which he made the decisions he made. So he avoided tough decisions. And that marks loss for others. So to what extent is emotional intelligence and ethics related? You know, when I saw Christian values, it took me back to my own upbringing, very strict Catholic primary school, well, home, primary school, secondary school. And that, I think that shaped, and that was the reason why I was very morally and technically oriented. So I felt like, okay, if my moral position was correct, then nothing else was important. I was justified in saying how I felt because I have that to back me up. I see we have a comment. Oh.
Yeah, it's just that we ask everyone to make sure and fill out the survey and give us feedback.
Right. Yes, yes.
Kathryna, I am just thinking that this is Mati Ratanan's perspective, which may be subjective in its own way, because we don't know whether or not she is a Christian and therefore understands what Christian values mean. Or even if in this context, it's referring to the fact that perhaps Kenneth Lay sought to consider the feelings of his directors and his CEO, who was the one who was sent to jail primarily for the collapse, and whether it was because to me the Christian values suggest that this is someone who is very nice and kind to others, you turn the other cheek kind of person, and the remark is suggesting that he lost he didn't have the ability to see the systemic failure that was likely to result throughout the organization.
Exactly.
So
it was too nice. He couldn't say no, and he could not tell where that boundary lay in terms of Christian values versus doing what is best for the organization.
Yes, because sometimes you have to make tough decisions if you are looking at the longevity of the organization, as opposed to, acceding to request demands or desires of those who are close to you, who may feel that they are so supportive of you, and therefore, there's a two-way relationship in that. And it takes real courage to be able to face those persons and to be able to say in the kindest way possible that it's not that you don't appreciate who they are or what they would have contributed, but the right thing to do for the success of the organization is something very different that may be painful for persons to contend with.
Yes, indeed. So I was intrigued by this particular issue, and I was reading parts of a book called Emotional Intelligence as Ethical Leadership. And they were saying that implicit within EI, as in all great leadership, is the commitment to serving others and to working for their best interests. Because leadership and ethics are two sides of the same coin, leaders who understand the nature of emotional intelligence and its ethical implications are able to honor the many faceted moral and ethical duties that make up ethical leadership. So it just goes to show how intertwined EI and ethics are in leading and in the boardroom, and maybe just that injection of emotional intelligence can help, prevent or help people make the right decisions in the best interest of companies and perhaps prevent such corporate collapses and systemic failures. I mean, I'm just, we could talk about this for another 2 hours. This is just my summary.
Yeah. Yes, agreed. I mean, I too have been fascinated by Enron and the impact it has had. And there's so many stories within the organization and especially whistleblower who herself really triggered the entire thing. So maybe one day we should do a case study on Enron for all to share our views and better.
And the thing about it is not all of the accounting principles or practices were illegal. So that whole illegal, immoral, debate, as I said, we could talk about it for another 2 hours. So I know time is upon us. If we have no other comments, I think that would be the end of my presentation.
Okay, so we have someone with his hand up. That's Timothy Mar. So, Timothy, yes, we'd like to hear you. Thank you, David, for joining us. And for anyone who is leaving now too, please make sure you click on the link and give us your formal feedback, because it's important for us to have that as we plan and move ahead. So yes, Timothy, let's hear your
Hi,
conclusion.
good afternoon. Just a comment really. So there's a distinct difference between leadership and management. And from the discussions that we've had today, everything clearly ties into, what I've learned at that previous conference, in that emotional intelligence is definitely a fundamental part of being a good leader. It really helps define that leadership role, because you can manage, and manage is just probably figures and numbers and charts and all those kind of things and profits and so forth. But leadership really gets you into the interactions with people and understanding and emotional intelligence. So I just wanted to comment on that.
Yes, thank you for that. I agree with you.
Okay, so it is just a few minutes to our close time. So there have been a few questions asking if you can have a copy of the presentation. I want us to think about it a little bit, only because some of the material which Kathryna shared here was also part of what Alison would use for her workshop, and some of what we use for our certificate program as well. So just give us a few days, because to be honest, as soon as I'm done here, the focus is going to be on the gala for this Saturday. But definitely you would have the link to the recording, so you would be able to review all that Kathryna has presented, and the conversation which has taken place. I think it really has been an excellent session. So Kathryna, I want to thank you. You really did put quite a bit of preparation in here, and you have started the ball rolling and what needs to be maybe a year-long focus, because there's so many issues around this. And how do you treat with it? How do we build a board that really is focused on effectiveness? And these emotional things do tend to, especially if it's negative emotion, because you're quite right, emotion is neither negative or positive. It's the context of it. And so yes, I believe that this has been a really, really great session. It has raised so many points that we need to continue to discuss. So I'm going to start with saying we will be doing a series of workshops, the first of which would be held on the 27th of January. It will begin with Charlotte Valère, who is the former chair of the Institute of Directors out of the UK. So you guys will be seeing that flyer soon. But this is our final session in terms of conversations, discussions, workshops, masterclasses for the year. We move now on to the our gala on Saturday, and then we begin our preparations for next year. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to join us. It really is important for us to have you participate and also give us your feedback. And may I also say, I would like to invite some of you who are present here who would be interested in sharing your thoughts and hosting one of our CCGI's conversation series. We would be happy to provide this forum for you so that we can continue to build this conversation. And of course, your topic can be slightly different as well. So just send me an email. And you can send the email to info@caribbeangovernance.org. Both Christy and I monitor that email, and so we ensure that we pick up everything so that we'd be able to continue to bring persons, who some new voices as well, to be able to do presentations for us here at CCGI. So I want to thank all of you. Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Joanne. Especially thank you, Kathryna. Thank
Thank
you
you
to
so
all
much,
our participants.
Kamla and CCGI, and to everyone who participated. Excellent, excellent evening.